All right, everything wrong with this finale is just an extension of everything I've been saying about this TV series the entire time. My main takeaway on the level of is this a good show, again, was how much it seems like they took everything they knew about what really happened and asked themselves, how do we tell the most boring version of this story possible while assuming everyone knows all the good stuff, so we don't need to get into any of that. Everything a good storyteller would drill down on in order to spend the time to really open up these characters and show you who they are. All of that shit goes in a montage or some fast and sloppy scene that seems to reference their assumption. You already know all of those things, so they don't have to let you see them. Then instead of spending time on that stuff, they'll give you an 8-minute scene of a couple having an argument any couple could have. You could take 85% of the scenes in this whole series that are not set on a stage or in a studio, change the names of the characters, and you're just watching some generic soap opera trash that has been shown on television a million times. Even though they have seemed so dedicated to making this story as boring as possible, I still could not believe that they merely glossed over the whole fake kidnapping thing the way they did, as if it was just some minor event in the Tammy Wynette story, and as if her glaringly fake makeup that she wore to exaggerate the bruises that George Ritchie gave her, and her subsequent attempts to continue lying about having a stalker in her life were not the most devastating things to happen to her career. As well as a giant flashing neon sign saying, "Over here, look, this is the key to understanding Tammy Wynette as a person." At no point does this series ever communicate to us how totally fucked her career was as a result of all those things. So the KLF collaboration in this episode that brought her back toward the end of her life and resuscitated her career wouldn't mean anything to us, even if they did try to communicate the career revival aspect of what was happening on screen, which of course they did not, because Tammy Wynette was a success from the beginning to the end, and she was just always the best in this TV show. And like I've been saying, this is not a matter of some superfan pointing out that's not what technically happened. The version of events this TV series presents to you is nowhere close to reality, or even attempting to communicate a version of the spirit of what happened. This isn't the truth condensed. This isn't the truth made simpler. This is just complete fucking fiction. A lot of people have been asking me, well, if they're making up so much stuff, what about the fact that this TV series is based on Georgette's book? Well, let's pretend for a second this is strictly what Georgette's book looks like on TV. In this final episode, the TV show itself says that Georgette did not know George Jones until she was well into adulthood with children of her own. So the show literally debunks itself as an authoritative source on the subject of George Jones. Everybody with me so far? We can all agree on that? Okay, because what's really happening is far worse than that. This show is credited as being based on Georgette's book, and she did get paid for that. But this show is depicting all kinds of ridiculous bullshit that is not in Georgette's book. There are so many examples of this TV series fabricating things that are nowhere to be found in that book and leaving out very important things that are in that book. It's very strange to me that this TV series chose to not portray George Ritchie as he's portrayed in Georgette's book, because in a lot of ways that book feels like it was written just to take Ritchie down. And yeah, the TV series shows him being a woman beater and manipulative, but that barely scratches the surface of the role he played in this history. I guess in order to portray George Jones as a selfish addict who didn't care about his daughter, they also have to pretend that George Ritchie didn't blackmail George Jones by threatening to not let Jones see Georgette unless he did that first reunion tour with Tammy, which was his motive for doing that first reunion tour with Tammy. He was being blackmailed. It was not because he was still in love with Tammy Wynette and wanted to work with her. For this episode to give George Ritchie the post-episode honorific of stating how many top 10 hits the guy had a hand in writing, as if that is the most important thing about him, is truly and deeply ignorant. Another disgusting invention this show came up with for no reason is that George Jones was in any way unfaithful to his wife Nancy with Tammy Wynette on the reunion tour in the 90s. No matter what personal problems any of these people may have ever had with each other, that is a bridge too far. There's no justifiable reason for that to be in this TV series, and I felt as if I was going to vomit when I saw that. George Jones and Tammy Wynette spent many years selling the media and their fans a story about how they were going to remain in love and be in love with each other no matter who else they were married to and no matter who else was involved. This was a love that could never die. And I'm sure they did always have the kind of bond you share with a person when you've both been through hell together and put each other through hell. Because even though it's fucked up, you're the only ones who were really there the whole time and know what really happened. There is a shared bond when you and a person go through something like that and put each other through something like that. But there is no question the actual romance was gone long before George Jones recorded the song He Stopped Loving Her Today. That song did not fuck Jones up emotionally. He just thought it sucked. He thought the melody was derivative of Christopherson's Help Me Make It Through the Night, which is funny because they have Tammy sing that for no reason. And it was derivative of that melody. And Jones didn't think anyone wanted to hear it again with these maudlin lyrics, so he spent months making fun of it and singing it wrong on purpose. And Billy Sherrill finally had to splice together a bunch of different takes in order to make the record. There was no such thing as a song that was too sad for George Jones to be able to sing it. If you don't believe me, I would encourage you to listen to everything he ever recorded. If there was a song too sad for him to sing, this absolutely would not have been it, because he thought the song was ridiculous the whole time. Jones was 100% not earnestly singing this song. He was 100% not singing it about Tammy. She was 100% not involved in the production process and certainly did not visit the premises at any point when they were attempting to record it. George Jones did try to reconcile with Tammy Wynette, sincerely, for a while after the 1975 divorce, maybe a year and a half max. By the late 70s, when he and D. Doodle the Duck and the old man began putting Tammy on the same people we should kill list as Peanut Montgomery, in the same period of time when they did try to kill Peanut Montgomery, I think it's safe to say the flame of love had burned out. Billy Sherrill did have Jones record the song because Billy knew it would play into years of the media talking about how George Jones was probably acting insane, not so much because of all the cocaine he's doing, but because he was clearly still in love with his ex-wife. That notion sold a lot of records before and after He Stopped Loving Her Today, and there's no question that notion had a lot to do with why that song was so successful with country music fans who believed this George is still in love with Tammy narrative. But it was not at all what was happening behind the scenes in the real lives of these real people. Jones and Tammy were not romantically in love with each other for the rest of their lives. That is just a fantasy they sold to millions of people in order to make a lot of money. When you sell something to that many people that successfully, there are always going to be people who still believe it. That's the way this works. But when George Jones wrote his autobiography, I believe that came out in 1996, he was very clear that he hated working with Tammy in the 1980s and the 1990s, and he gave very good reasons for why that was the case. Tammy had spent years lying about George Jones in order to boost her own persona. The Ritchie brothers came in when Jones was completely mentally and physically incapacitated and blackmailed him in order to orchestrate this reunion in order to boost Tammy's career, which was in very bad shape because of all of the tabloid scandals she was a part of, which this TV show ignores. That's real life. Jones' autobiography came out 2 years before Tammy Wynette died, and at no point did she contradict what he wrote to say they were still in love with each other on that final tour. This fantasy is not real. It is a product, and it is one that is still being sold in this TV show in order to make certain people some money. The only people telling you that fantasy is real either bought into it or are selling you that product. I did not include this in season 2 of Cocaine and Rhinestones because to me it seemed like a personal matter that didn't have anything to do with the larger story of George Jones' life and Tammy Wynette's life and how all of this happened. That situation has clearly changed now because of what millions of people who see this TV show are going to believe. So, if any of you would like the real story about what's going on here and all of the information about this TV series and who made it, I would recommend finding a headline on abc.com that reads, "George Jones feuds with daughter." The video, of course, has been taken down, but me, being a thorough researcher, I wrote down what he said when I watched that video. And this is George Jones standing in his living room, reading a statement to the camera in order for it to be released to the public. Quote, oh, and this is the way I handle quotes, by the way, in case you would like to plagiarize me. Quote, "I would like to apologize for my daughter Georgette and her new husband for putting so much bad things about me on the internet and Facebook. None of these things are true. They are all about money. I have gave and gave until I can no longer give. I will never let her go hungry, but I am tired of putting out, and I am not the person they claim I am." End quote. So yeah, George Jones and Tammy Wynette were still playing up the old flame angle for the One Project in the 1990s because it sold albums and concert tickets. But it sure looks like all of those old feelings they were having fell more into the category of spite and resentment than some sort of yearning for a great lost love. The motive for their final reunion album was a desperate money grab from two artists country radio had deemed too old to play. Their records weren't getting played, so they weren't making as much money. Plain and simple, let's cash in on this thing while we still can one last time. What it wasn't was some kind of eternal need that Jones and Tammy had to sing together again. And if you don't believe me, look up the production process for that album. Read the producers, engineers, everyone talking about what it was like to make that album because it was a nightmare. The songs were not good because nobody in Nashville wanted to give material that had the potential to be a hit in the hands of a younger artist who may actually get played on radio. Nobody wanted to give that stuff to George and Tammy. And as far as the way that they acted towards each other in the studio, at best you could say they tolerated each other's presence, but it did get to the point where they couldn't be in the studio at the same time. They had to record their parts on separate occasions so that they wouldn't be in the studio on the same day. The people who made this album and were in the studio are on record about this. That's the album they made, and that's the album they were touring. So if that's what the album process was like, how? If they couldn't even be in the studio at the same time, I think we can all agree it's pretty insane to imagine that they just started making out with each other on the tour, right? And in fact, they were not able to keep up the lovey-dovey act on that tour for very long. They started acting pretty nasty toward each other by the end of things. I'm not going to get into all of it here. As I have been saying, season 2 of Cocaine and Rhinestones is everything you're ever going to need to know about this. Even if they were still attracted to each other, Tammy was in very bad shape by that time. It was all she could do to stand up and breathe most days. There's just no realistic scenario where these two elderly people are sneaking off to put their tongues in each other's mouths. It makes no sense. The worst part about this is Nancy Jones did nothing to deserve the way she is depicted in this show. In Georgette's own book, she calls Nancy a saint and tells the story about how Nancy is the only reason that Georgette was finally able to have what relationship she did manage to have with her father. I know most of the people who want to talk to me about Georgette's book haven't read it, but that is in there. You can check. Of course, the TV show can't tell you any of this because they want to make Nancy come off as a greedy asshole who was basically the female equivalent of George Ritchie. Facts are, Nancy nearly died several times trying to help George Jones quit doing cocaine. The song He Stopped Loving Her Today is not what revived George Jones. In the show, they don't even explain how he got sober. He white knuckles it. He just decides to get sober and poof, he's sober. Nonsense. The truth is, Jones spun even further out of control after the success of that song, and Nancy is the only reason Jones was able to get it together, the only reason he got his voice back, the only reason he was able to create more incredible music with the rest of his life, the only reason he didn't end up dead in a fucking ditch somewhere. And anyone who tells you otherwise is a liar. If you think you learned anything about Nancy Jones from this TV show, you are wrong. Again, it was Nancy who pushed George to have a relationship with his daughter. Tammy did not do that. As shown in this TV show, Tammy is not the one who did that. Tammy spent years allowing George Ritchie to drive a wedge between Tammy and everyone else in her life, including her own daughters. So it's a pretty far stretch to imagine she woke up one day and decided to encourage Jones to get to know Georgette. Fucking crazy. The way the finale ended with George Jones and Tammy Wynette riding off into the sunset singing a song together was perhaps the most laughable scene in the entire series. Just a complete joke. And all those what happened to which character wrap-up things at the end said a lot about why the people who made this show wanted to make this show and how much they either never understood about who these people were or why these things happened, or how much they never cared about who these people were or why these things happened. To ignore the fire at Tammy Wynette's house, to ignore George Jones being blackout drunk at the CMA Awards, to ignore the Ritchie brothers' manipulations and abuse of George Jones, to ignore the fact that at one time George Jones was Jones and two other split personalities suffering hallucinations of monsters trying to kill them everywhere they went. Any version of what Nancy went through getting Jones off of blow. These are all of the high points everyone knows about this story. Top to bottom, this is a story where if you sat down and told it straight through without any embellishment, nearly everyone would assume you were making up a lot, if not most of this stuff, but it's all true. And for some reason, this TV series felt the need to change a bunch of stuff in order to make it less interesting, less believable, and less worth anyone's time. To not get into any of the circumstances surrounding Tammy Wynette's death, I mean, my God, how does anyone who claims to be involved in storytelling in any capacity make the decision to just ignore that, ignore every aspect of that? Just the visual elements and everything it would have communicated about these characters. The way they were confronted with the consequences of all of the decisions they made. We're talking Tammy Wynette's freshly rotting corpse in the kitchen, while George Ritchie and all his friends stand around smoking and talking like it's a party. How do you ignore that? George Ritchie's horrifying performance at the public memorial. How do you ignore that? George Jones writing a letter to Don Imus asking why George Ritchie was never arrested. How do you ignore that? This is high fucking drama, and every bit of it is exactly what happened. Instead, we get this giant, spiteful middle finger aimed directly at anyone who cares about the truth or might care to learn the truth. Anyone who would in any way question this fantasy version of events or insinuate that this fantasy version of events is not what happened. It's insulting. Oh, and at the very end of the series, we finally find out why they've been making such a big deal out of #1 singles the whole time. You ready? It's because even though George Jones is the only individual person to ever live who charted top 40 country singles in 7 different decades, nobody else ever did that. No one else is ever gonna do that. Even though that happened, more of Tammy Wynette's singles hit #1. So fuck George Jones, he's a piece of shit. Everything he ever did that was good in his life was because Tammy Wynette told him to do it, and that's why he was in love with her forever and ever. Happy ever after, the fucking end. I mean, the reason I began doing the work I do is because of TV shows like this. I was so sick of knowing for a fact every time a movie or TV show about a country artist got announced, it was certain to be a pathetic distortion of the truth at best. And this is perhaps the worst thing I've ever seen. It's insulting because what it says is that's what needs to happen for any stories about these people to be worth telling. It's degrading. It's offensive. These are real people. They do not deserve to have their legacies distorted this way for the profit of others and for the cheap entertainment of an audience who's going to look at this from the outside and think, wow, I guess all these country singers are just worthless pieces of trash. And if that's what they sound like when they sing, then the fans must have only been paying attention because of how crazy this bullshit is. It gets everything backwards, cart way before the horse. It misses the entire soul of the entire thing. In this finale, when they have George Jones trying to talk to a radio DJ about everything he thinks is wrong with modern country music, that is exactly the way I feel about TV shows like this. And it would blow my mind if George Jones didn't feel exactly the same way about this entire series. I sincerely wish he were alive to tell us what he thought about this. I'm positive he would not have kept his mouth shut regarding the disrespect shown to his widow, Nancy, in this finale. And since George Jones isn't here to say anything about it, goddamn right I will. Shame on you. Shame.